Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson at the State Water Survey and the Private Well Class Program. Today our webinar is entitled, "Is My Water Safe to Drink? Common Questions About Private Wells." It's hosted by the State Water Survey and also the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, and this is all, our whole program is sponsored, funded, and supported by RCAP and US EPA. So this is part of a national program that's implemented through RCAP and to support private well owners. And RCAP has staff in every state, and our private well program staff at RCAP work through 6 regions, which I'll show in a second, to support private well owners all over the country. And we're kind of the online portion of that program, and they're the boots on the ground and help people one-on-one and hold in-person classes and some of those things. And so we have a class, it's a 10-lesson class, that this webinar, these materials will follow that, but it's not the actual class. And I'll show you later in the program today where you can sign up to actually take the lessons. There's 10 of them that give you a lot of basics about groundwater, wells, hydrology, well types, all those sorts of things. And that is the private well class program. We are recording this today, and it will be available in a few days on through our website and also on our YouTube channel. And I'll mention several times today that one of the things that's unique about our program, I think, is that you all are allowed to ask questions in advance, and we try to answer 10 to 15 of those questions as part of the slide deck. That's part of this actual webinar, and then we'll also take additional questions at the end. Every webinar, there are different questions we try to answer. Sometimes we get the same question every time, and sometimes we get some unique ones that we've tried to build a whole group of those, if you will. And so one of the things you can do attending this is go watch the other recordings. Even this same webinar, which was last delivered, I believe, in February, the questions that were asked at the end will be different. And so you can go to that video and scroll through this text that will be very similar and get to the questions, and there'll be different questions that we've answered. And so you can do that with many of the webinars we've done. We do one every month, and so over the last 5 or 6 years, we've built up quite a collection of those things. There will be time at the end for follow-up questions. So you have a question box or a chat box in your GoToWebinar window. If you'll put the questions you might have there, Katie Buckley, who's with me today and as part of our program, is monitoring that, and she will make a list of those. We share a Google document that I can pull up on the screen at the end to go through whatever questions we might get that are different from the ones we're going to answer. And so with that, I do want to mention, if you're a NEHA member, National Environmental Health Association, or an Illinois licensed environmental health professional, this webinar is available for credit. And the one issue with the NEHA side is that you have a 2-year credentialing cycle, and you can only take this particular webinar once every 2 years. I've listed at the bottom on the right the other times we've offered this webinar in the last 2 years. So if you've attended one of those and got credit for it, you can't get credit for it again today. As I said, there are different questions, and it's a good refresher. And also on the handouts tab of your GoToWebinar window, there's a certificate of attendance. You can ask us to provide, I guess, a copy of the slide deck and the completed NEHA forms. And so our email address is info@privatewellclass.org, and you'll work with Katie through that email address to get your paperwork that you need for submitting for your hours. So again, I'm Steve Wilson. I'm a groundwater hydrologist at the Water Survey, and Katie is our water resource outreach specialist. Also here, we're in the same group, the groundwater section at the Water Survey, and she'll be monitoring those questions today and helping with the CEU part of this afterward, of the CE part, continuing education part. I mentioned RCAP. This is who RCAP is, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. It's a network of 6 regional nonprofit organizations and a national office that provide basically support to rural areas, small communities for water and wastewater, as well as private well owners. The funding for the program that funds us and their work in private wells is mostly from US EPA, although a few of the regions have additional funding through their states to provide additional support. Not only do they do, education and outreach, they hold events where you can go in person for training or education, but they also have programs through, like USDA has got a low interest loan program for well owners, and a number, not all, but I believe 4 or 5 of the regions actually have are lenders. And so if you meet certain economic income criteria, you're eligible to get a low interest loan from USDA or through this USDA program at one of these regional nonprofits to help maybe put in a new well or to fix your septic tank or even add treatment. And so if you have, know which state you live in and which program would be in your area, and here's their contact information, but we can also, if you email us and say, hey, who's the RCAP person in Illinois, we can send an email introducing you to that person or persons so that you can find out what they offer. One of the things they do one-on-one with well owners is this assessment we developed with a group of professionals from around the country. It's basically a well assessment tool, and what it allows you to do, it got 18 sections. It allows someone one-on-one to sit down with you, go over the information you do know about your well, and also try to find information either from the county, local health district, or state about your well, and then work with you to understand what risks or vulnerabilities you might have. This is all free. It's funded by US EPA. They aren't selling anything. They're actually, when they complete this, they include pictures, a well log if they can find it, and they will give it all back to you filled out so that you have that as a record of your well, as well as a set of recommendations like why you should test every year. And if your well cap isn't a proper well cap or it's not properly sealed, that'll be mentioned in the recommendations that's a best practice. We see all kinds of crazy things on wells, Folgers cans, you name it, and those aren't protective from insects or even snakes or larger critters. And so the idea is they're coming out to work with you to help you understand how to better manage and take care of your well. So the assessment is really like a sanitary survey for those of you who know what they are. The EPA requires sanitary surveys every 3 years for any community water supply. And so it's basically an assessment of how good they're doing as providing water to the people in their towns. And so this follows a similar format, but it's not enforceable. This is all volunteer, and you're the only one that'll see your results. It's also a chance for us to educate you as a well owner about your specific situation and well. One thing I can tell you from all the years that I've done worked with well owners is really no 2 wells are identical. There's always something either at the site, the way the pipes are in the house, different kinds of treatment, or even different drillers put in different kinds of wells or drill in different ways sometimes. And so it's really unique in many cases, your situation. And so to have someone who has experience to look at that is actually just a really great tool for you, and allows us to help you understand better best practices and what you can be doing, as well as increasing communication. Some well owners have this fear of their local health department, or someone else is going to tell them they can't use their well. Well, in 99% of the country, health departments don't have that authority. Like in Illinois, our county health departments can't tell you can't use your well. They may recommend it and say, hey, you have arsenic at 10 times the health standard for a community water supply. It's not probably safe for you to drink this, but it's really up to you as a well owner to decide what's your risk and what you want to do. So they've done a lot of these assessments, over 2,800 around the country, and they've also held a bunch of workshops related to the assessment tool. Now that's on us these days. This was a number of years ago. And so since COVID started, and actually the year before that, we're doing this workshop on how to use this assessment tool virtually, a webinar just like today, but it's 4 hours long. And we're actually going to have one of those in early September. I think it's the 7th. And so if you're interested in that, you can email us or look on our website. I'll show you that towards the end. But it's also, if you're some other type of professional working with well owners, RCAP can work with you, or you can work with them to develop a partnership related to either having a in-person event or anything related to doing outreach and education to well owners. They can provide you materials to give to the well owners you serve. It's really it's a supportive group of folks who are, our goal is really just to educate well owners about their wells and teach them how to be better stewards to protect both their well, their water quality, and their aquifer. Okay, so I mentioned I'm at the State Water Survey. If you're not familiar, most folks are not. It's one of the scientific surveys in Illinois. Every state has a state geological survey and a natural history survey. Illinois is one of 2 states with a state water survey. So we focus strictly on water issues, both above, below ground, and in the air, as well as chemistry. The water survey was started by our state legislature in 1895 because of cholera and typhoid outbreaks. And I typically show a map from 1912 or 1916, I think, of a town that had a typhoid outbreak in Illinois that we investigated. Most of you, if you've been on these before, are probably tired of that, so I'm just going to show a few screenshots of some of the archives that we have. This is a chemist from the 30s working in one of our labs at the time, in Noise Lab on campus. And this is a young man in New Athens, Illinois, who's helping a water survey scientist do some water quality analysis. And if you've done any kind of field analysis before, we have vans with electricity and instruments and running tubes out. You can see they have reagents there and a microscope, and they're titrating. It's quite an effort to do a water quality sample in the field back in the day, and then this is also from 1916. So the water survey's got a long history of public health protection, working with both communities in Illinois and well owners in Illinois and around the country on issues related to water quality. And that's kind of our background and the basis for us with our private well program. We also, in Illinois, house the state's water well logs. And so in Illinois, drillers are required to file a permit and a log with the county health department. The counties then send a copy of that to us. And so we house all the state's well logs and have about 450,000 well logs in our files of the estimated about 800,000 private wells in use in Illinois. So if you're a well owner, the things to remember, so I grew up on a private well, but now I live in town and I'm on a community water supply. So wells aren't regulated. It's up to you. They're regulated at construction and maybe an initial test before they're put into service. But in most of the country, once it's installed and it's owned by someone, you're responsible for making sure it's safe to drink and that it's maintained. If your pump goes out, no one's going to pay for that for you. You're on the hook for that. And that's, the advantage of not having a water bill every month, like the one I pay. I show you at the bottom, $40 to $50 a month. Now, as my daughter's getting older, that's crept up. She just turned 10, and our water bill is never less than $60 these days. But that's the cost spread out over all the residents in the Champaign-Urbana, Savoy area to maintain all the infrastructure, all the pipes go into every home, make sure we have water pressure, and make sure the water's tested and safe to drink. You as a well owner are responsible for all of those things. If, as I mentioned, if your pump fails, you need to get it fixed. If you have a valve that is getting corroded and it won't turn or it breaks off, you need to get that fixed. And the last thing about testing, people look at their water, or that they have a smell in their water, they assume it's bad. Those are aesthetic problems. Most of the time, contaminants are colorless, odorless, and tasteless, like arsenic. You would never know you have arsenic in your water. It looks just as clear and pristine as treated water. So the thing to do is you have to test, and that's the message there. My dad was one of these people. I grew up on an old dug well, 14 feet deep, hand dug in 1933 by my grandfather. He claimed it was better than city water because it didn't have chemicals in it. City treats water, puts chlorine in it. But that's what the city's doing to make sure their water's safe. Our water, after a large rainstorm, would be cloudy, which means it's getting surface contamination, which means it was completely unsafe. And so understanding those things is part of what our class is about. So that's why you need to know about your well log, if there is one, so you know where your water's coming from. How deep's your well? Where's the pump set? Does it have a screen? If it's a sand and gravel well, it does. If it's a bedrock well, probably not. If it's in a large diameter dug well, it's getting water from the water table, not an aquifer, like the one I grew up on. And so it's much more susceptible to surface contamination. Those are the things you need to know. And if you can find your log, or if you have a copy of your log, a lot of that information will be there. There's also natural occurring contaminants. So no one's done anything to spill a contaminant, or it's not because of any man-made issue. But arsenic, for instance, naturally occurring. It's the seventh most common element in Earth's crust, and it exists in most of the country, not everywhere, but there are a lot of areas in Illinois. We know which aquifers have arsenic in it, and so we mention to people that if you're in this county, you should probably test for arsenic because it's can be pretty high over there, sort of thing. The idea behind this class and these webinars is also to help you learn enough that you're asking the right questions and you understand that there are local sources of information that probably know a lot more than I do about your specific situation that can help you. And you should know who those folks are and lean on them to provide you that information. And lastly, sample your well. Many groundwater private wells are safe, but unless you test, you don't know. And what a city water supply does, which I think almost half the country, community water supplies are on groundwater as far as population. So that's, 200, not quite 200 million people. All of those wells are tested. If the water needs to be treated, or if they're removing iron or other things for aesthetic reasons, the water coming out of the plant is safe to drink, the water plant. That's your job as a well owner. And the only way to know if you even need treatment or if you have any kind of issues is to sample your well. And so that's the one maintenance thing that everyone should do regularly. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So I guess right now, so testing, it's really one of the biggest, talking about common questions, this is probably the biggest one we get is about testing. What do I test for? How do I collect it? How often? Where do I get it analyzed? All these things. So we're going to go through what we recommend, and I will mention, remember, we're talking to a national audience. And so if I knew you were in the Mahomet Aquifer in Champaign County, Illinois, I may recommend a few other things or a few different things than I would to a general list of folks. And I'll show you that in a second. But understanding the basics of testing is certainly an important issue. So as far as where do you collect the sample from, your drinking water is usually your kitchen tap, right? If it's an outside spigot, maybe you're taking a drink from a hose once in a while, but really most of your drinking water is coming from your kitchen sink. And so it's important to take a sample there. It could be very different from the water coming out of an outside spigot. A lot of times some people will have a spigot put in near their well. It's not going through any treatment. It's not going through the pipes in your home. It's just going from the well up to the spigot. And the water quality in those can be very different because of the pipes in your home or because you maybe added treatment. And so what our lab does, and part of that's because as groundwater scientists, we're trying to understand both the aquifer water quality and drinking water quality of a homeowner. We ask people to collect both samples, one at their kitchen tap and one at an outside tap that hasn't gone through any treatment or premise plumbing in the home. And some other things, obviously, if you have lead pipes in your home, if it's an older house, if your piping is before 1986, really before 2014, when lead-free really became an issue, and it changed. Lead solder, there's studies that show that copper pipes with lead solder can have as much lead as a home with lead pipes, depending on the water chemistry and how it may be corrosive and leaching lead. So understanding those things is clearly important. And when you go to talk to a lab, a good lab is going to provide you detailed instructions. Maybe they even send you a kit, but they tell you how to collect it, when to collect it. And if they can't give you all that information, I would go to a different lab and one that can. And I'm sure I say this somewhere else, but we recommend you use a certified lab, one that does testing for community water supplies that are regulated, just because by being certified and going through all the bells and hoops and whistles that you have to be certified, it gives you some assurance that the lab knows what they're doing and they're using methods that are appropriate for the constituents you're trying to sample for. So as I mentioned, our lab suggests that a well owner collect two, one at an inside tap, preferably the kitchen, and one at an outside spigot. And really, one's the natural groundwater, the outside spigot. And a lot of times I'll tell well owners, collect the one on the kitchen tap first, because it's the water you first drink in the morning, or when you're filling up a pot to make, for my daughter, that would be macaroni. She loves it. But then let the water run at the outside spigot after that until you're, 10 or 15 minutes. So you're certain you're getting groundwater that's coming from the well after the pump's kicked on. And that would be representative of your natural groundwater. And the two of those together really give us a lot more information. And they can be significantly different. And I'm going to show you an example of that. Because of premise plumbing, so in your house, if you've got, copper pipes or lead pipes, if your water is corrosive, or if you've got whole house treatment for like RO, sometimes that can make the water more corrosive. I mean, there's a lot of issues. And so this is an example of a well owner, and this is from 2015. And this is, I mentioned the Muhammad Aquifer. This person lives in Muhammad or outside of Muhammad on a private well, which is over the Muhammad Aquifer. It's a 235-foot deep well. But you can see here, this is their natural water quality. This is from an outside spigot. The sodium's at 25.9. What else is important here? Calcium and magnesium are part of hardness, 85.2, 33.6. Over on the right side, the turbidity and color are pretty high, and the pH is 8.2. And then down near the bottom right, hardness is 351. So it's pretty hard water, typical groundwater in Illinois. So after they have a filter, because they have iron and manganese, and they also have a softener. And so you can see they have a regular salt softener, it uses sodium chloride. And so now it's reduced the potassium, iron, and calcium, and a lot in magnesium, but now the sodium's really high. So if you're on a low sodium diet, it's something to consider. The alternative is to use potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride for your softener salt in that example. But you can also see what it's done on the right side. It took the hardness from 351 down to 0.68. And the pH changed a little bit. It went up. It's actually, this is alkaline water. pH of 7 is neutral, but the turbidity and color have gone way down. So the filter and the softener together have really changed the chemistry of the water, but made it soft and, got rid of a lot of the iron that would cause iron staining on your porcelain. So this person in 2015 added an RO unit on their kitchen tap, which RO stands for reverse osmosis. And it's, it really is it's kind of a filter, I guess, but it's got a membrane and hardly anything can get through it. So these arrows pointing to the left are less than signs, which means it's below detection limit for our instrumentation in our lab. And so like for aluminum, the detection limit's 37 micrograms per liter, and it's below that because it wasn't detected. It's not saying it's zero, it's saying that we know it's less than 37 micrograms per liter. So if we go to the next one where we added the RO unit, now almost everything is less than detection limit. The sodium, it even reduced that down to 6.24 from 198. But the one thing, you've taken some of the buffering constituents out of the water, and so it's lowered the pH, if you look on the right side, to 6.23, which is a little below neutral. It's not that bad, but acidic water can be corrosive depending on some of the other constituents in the water, and that's a concern for leaching lead or copper from lead or copper pipes or lead solder. So it's an unintended consequence, if you will. And so I hear once in a while about someone who has a whole house RO unit. I would think that most of the time there's not a reason to really use a whole house unit. You just want it on your kitchen tap. But in those cases, you're running water through your house that was alkaline and now is a little bit acidic in this case, if you had that unit. So what do you test for? That's really the million-dollar question, right? Every situation is different. It depends on your depth, your location. Are you in a rural area or in an urban area? It makes a difference. And what formation, the geologic formation your water is coming from, or if there are known contaminants in the area. And how do you find that out? You talk to your county, local, or state health department and ask. And that's really part of this whole thing. You need to find out who those folks are, identify them, and introduce yourself and say, I'm a well owner and I'm concerned about my well. What can I do? If they can't answer a question you have, they will know someone who can. They'll reach out to someone else who can. There's other folks you can go to, your driller, the people who record the well logs for the state, if they have a state law or regulate drillers, even in co-op extension, your county, a local co-op extension agent, a lot of them, in our state, we have 1 or 2 specialists in co-op extension who focus on wells. And so all of the other extension agents really rely on them to help whenever they get a question they can't answer. So we also recommend, as does almost everyone else in the groundwater industry or the private well industry, that you sample for coliform bacteria and nitrate annually. And the reason neither of those, nitrate is a problem for babies, blue baby syndrome. There's some evidence that can cause some other issues, but nothing's been is conclusive. And so the EPA hasn't considered making nitrate a primary contaminant for health effects. And coliform bacteria also is not harmful. It's E. coli that's harmful. And the reason we test for coliform and nitrate is because they're fairly ubiquitous in the near surface environment. And so if you have coliform or nitrate at a high level in your well, it indicates a pathway into your well, which means your well's not properly sealed. And if that occurs, that means other things can get in your well as well. So these are a fairly cheap way to make sure your well is properly sealed and that things from the surface aren't getting in your well. And if they are, that's a red flag that says you need to be concerned about other things that could be, man-made contaminants or your septic or livestock facility nearby, or even feedlot that could be causing problems with your well, where you have E. coli and other bacteria that are harmful. So some examples I want to show you on why. I'm going to give you a list of what we recommend in general, but it depends on where you live and why you need to talk to other folks to find out what might be in your water. So this is Rhode Island. It's a very small state, right? I think it's about 30 by 40 miles. And the county lines are shown there. The little dots that are on this are actually where there used to be orchards where a lot of arsenic was used. And they know these areas are contaminated, at least the soil is contaminated with arsenic. And that isn't necessarily mean it's leached to groundwater, but in some cases it has. And so they show this map, the Rhode Island Department of Health, to recommend if you're near an old orchard or an existing orchard, until I don't know the year, probably until the 60s, they were using a lot of arsenic-based pesticides. And, apples and some of those things are known to take arsenic from the soil, and it ends up in the apples. And so it's a concern. But the reason I like to show this is because of that big splotch that's in the middle. That's an area that has naturally occurring beryllium. And until I found this on their website, probably 8 years ago, I didn't even realize that beryllium was a regulated contaminant for community water supplies. They have to make sure it's below a certain level because it does have health effects, which means it's dangerous for us to drink. And I'd never heard of it ever occurring in groundwater, but there it is, and it certainly does. And this is really a great example of why you need to ask and find out from your state or local health department about what things might be naturally occurring in your area. Some areas have arsenic, some don't. Very few areas that I know of have beryllium. But if you're in Rhode Island, in the central part of the state, it's something you certainly want to test for. There are also sites, this is Massachusetts, has this, DEP has this on their website. If you have a bedrock well, you can type in your address, and it'll tell you if you're at risk of either uranium or arsenic contamination in your well. And so they've obviously identified the areas where these exist and the type of rocks that carry both arsenic and uranium. And so they're able to, by mapping all the aquifers and the geology in the state, they're able to give people a pretty good idea of whether they are at risk of one of these things. And so there are a number of tools like this. This is from Wisconsin, and this is actually an old slide. Their system's been changed a little bit, but this is still up and available. DNR is the regulatory agency in Wisconsin, and they put up any of the private well samples they have, they put them up like this. So I searched over in the upper right, I said arsenic by county. So it's showing me, so the health standard for arsenic is 10 parts per billion. And so there's one, up by Duluth, there's one county where they've had none detected in the samples. And we don't know how many samples that is, but they've had enough samples that they can come up with an estimate. And so they're showing, areas where some of the counties are clear, You can see right through basically to the land surface, if you will. In those counties, there's no data. But if you're by Green Bay, you know, the average sample for those 3 counties in red is over 21, which is twice the health standard for a community water supply. And so if I was going to buy a home in Wisconsin and it was going to have a private well, and I had this resource available, I'd look at all the different contaminants that are available, find out what the risks are, and then, you know, like I tell well owners all the time, it's buyer beware. Don't buy a home with a private well until you've tested it and you know the results. If it costs you, so what? You need to know, or you can really get yourself into an issue where you have to add treatment yourself or whatever. We had a colleague who was buying a house south of Champaign-Urbana in the country. It is an area that's the shallow aquifer is known to have arsenic. And so they tested the well first, and it had 73 parts per billion of arsenic. And so they had to make a decision on what to do. And it just turned out that they're right across the road from a community water supply line, and they were able to tap into that. And so now they don't use well water, they use city water, which has been treated and it's safe, rather than having to add their own treatment and be concerned that they're maintaining that system properly and all the things that go into removing arsenic to make sure their water's safe. So here's what we suggest. So we suggest annually you test for coliform and nitrate. You know, Brian Swistock at Penn State has a great program through Extension for well owners in Pennsylvania. He suggests every 14 months if you're going to do it every year. And it actually makes sense because over time, you're sampling, let's say you sample in January this year, the next year be March, then, you know, May, then July. It gives you a better feel for if there's any differences throughout the year. You know, maybe in January in a northern county that's, you know, frozen, you're not going to see any issues that you might see in July or during the rainy season. And so that's another option, and it's actually not a bad idea. And so I try to mention that. But we suggest this list here: fluoride, iron, lead, manganese. I won't go through the whole list. And then also ask your local or state health department if there's any local contaminants of concern, or if you're near anything that might be a risk. And obviously, yeah, you're sampling for bacteria every year anyway. And that's really one of the biggest and most common contaminants that you find. And so, yeah, in addition to this, then would be anything like uranium in Massachusetts, you know, whatever might be an issue locally. And so when should you test it? Well, besides, and I probably forgot to mention, for that list I just showed you, we recommend every 3 to 5 years, because some things shouldn't change. You know, I have a series of monitoring wells in Illinois that we installed in the 90s that we take a water sample every 10 years just to confirm it's a very deep aquifer, so it's not, there's no surface contamination issues. But we sample it every 10 years, and you know, one of those, it's in an area with high arsenic. Most of those wells are over 40 or 50 ppb of arsenic, but there's one well that's always like 3 to 5. And every time I sample it, it's probably been sampled 3 times, it's 3 to 5, even though all the wells around it, they're miles away, but in the same aquifer, always much higher. And so some deeper groundwater, especially that's protected or it's confined with a clay layer above it, the chemistry should be very similar from one sample to the next. So if you sample every 3 to 5 years and all of a sudden everything's changed, the water chemistry is much different, that likely suggests that there's a breach in your well somewhere, or something's happened with the aquifer, which can happen if it's a shallower aquifer. And so it's a good idea to do that. As far as when to test, you know, we're showing an old burnt well here. This is in El Paso County, Colorado, where a forest fire went through, and you can see what it did to the well cap and the wiring. But anytime you've had any kind of emergency response event like a flood or a fire, or if you've opened the cap, or if you notice, one thing I forgot to put on here is if there's a significant change in odor, tastes, that sort of thing, you want to find out why, because it should be pretty similar. And it may not be the well water at all. It may be something going on with your treatment or one of those things, but you need to start investigating that and trying to narrow it down. But really, anytime you've opened the well, you're introducing a potential for bacteria, and so it's a good idea to test to make sure that there's nothing there. So where to get it analyzed, every state does accredit labs, as I mentioned earlier, and so that's a certified lab I mentioned, and you should try to use one on their list. If you go to US EPA's website, I'm not going to show it here today, you can say certified laboratory and search for that, and you'll find a map with all the states. You click on your state and it takes you to the state page. In Illinois, that's the Illinois EPA. In Minnesota, that's the Minnesota Department of Health. In Wisconsin, it's Wisconsin DNR. Whoever the primacy agency is that regulates community water supplies, they have a list of all the labs that are certified to do testing. And they should be a lab. It might not even be in your state. It may be in another state. You find a lab that'll send you a kit. But the big thing is some states do have programs for private well sampling. Iowa does, for instance. Their Grants to Counties program can cost share samples. And I know New Mexico, whether they still do it or not, I think so, their septic program actually provides water testing if you give them the information about your septic tank, because they're trying to inventory those because of the risk of contamination that it could provide. And so you may get a free water sample just by providing information you should already be providing to the state in the first place. But a good lab will give you good sampling instructions, explain how to test, how to store the sample, when it needs to be done, all those things. And if you have other questions, you should ask, and the lab should be able to answer them. And as I mentioned before, the lab should provide everything and be able to answer your questions. If they can't, look for another lab, because you know, you're the person they're trying to serve. They should be able to serve you properly. And there's one other thing I was going to mention, and it's popped out of my head. So, I guess, so for instance, as an example, in Illinois, our health departments, most of them don't have their own labs. They use the state public health lab, and our state public health lab just tests for bacteria. But they have a courier that goes around the state on different days to different areas to pick up samples. So my son moved out to a house in the country in a rural area here in Champaign County, and the Champaign County Health Department requires you to, once you pick up a set of bottles, you have to take the sample on a Monday or Wednesday morning, and you have to have it to their office by noon. And that's because their courier comes by at noon and takes it straight to the lab. You know, some of these samples have a holding time, and they're supposed to be preserved or at least kept refrigerated. And so this is how they manage to get the samples to a certified lab and do all the things they're supposed to do. As far as interpreting results, I'm sure if you've ever had samples done, you've looked on the web and found sites where you can put in your sampling results, maybe not. But if you look at those things online, they can give you a sense of your results, but you should always take it to your health department for a qualified answer. And take it to a public health professional to find out how to protect your public health. Don't rely on a website. That's my advice. And if something's found in your well, you know, sometimes you might want to resample to confirm, especially if it's really an outrageous number. It could be that the lab just made a mistake, or the way the sample was collected was something funny. And if you have coliform bacteria, this should say, then have an E. coli test performed, and you should just boil your water and not drink it until you have a chance to get it tested, and then shock chlorinate your well to clean that up if you can. And yeah, so it's really important. I'm going to show you one of these websites, and that's why I bring all this up, because it was put together by a state agency in New Hampshire, and it's really a great tool. But again, it's something you should still take to your local health department for advice. And so the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services developed, probably 8 years ago or so by now, this Be Well Informed guide, and it's it's meant for residents of New Hampshire, but it actually can be used by anyone. And so it's really a nice tool. Down at the bottom, you click on enter your water well test results, your well water test results, and it takes you to this page where you can enter your information. The nice thing about this tool, one, it's put together by a state agency with funding from CDC, and so it's been vetted, if you will, and they're not trying to sell you anything at the end saying, oh, your water's bad, you need to have this, whatever. It's just information for you. The other nice thing is sometimes labs put out results in different units, and a lot of the other ones that I've seen require you to put everything in milligrams per liter, where this one has a drop down where you can tell it whether it's micrograms per liter, milligrams per liter, ppm or ppb, which milligrams per liter is the same as ppm and micrograms per liter is the same as ppb. So if a particular lab chooses to report using ppb instead of, you know, micrograms per liter, now I don't have to convert this to 0.015 milligrams per liter. and it's much less likely I'm going to make a mistake on what the value says, as well as what it's going to tell me that means. So I only put in lead or arsenic here, 15 micrograms per liter, which the standard is 10, so it's over the limit, and I hit submit, and it's giving me the red X saying it's 15 micrograms per liter, which is 0.015 milligrams per liter, and the standard is 0.01 milligrams per liter. So the other nice thing that this does is this tells you what kind of treatment will work on arsenic. So here it's a point of use absorptive media or point of use RO, reverse osmosis. Sometimes I've went to folks' homes to do an assessment or to talk to them about their well, or they've asked me to look at something about their well, and they've got several $1,000s of water treatment equipment. And I just said, well, where's your sample results? What do you have in your water? Oh, we never tested our water. We just felt like we needed to do this. Well, you might be wasting several $1,000s of just upfront costs, as well as all the maintenance for changing filters and any cartridges and whatever else you might need, because you didn't test first. And also, this will tell you if you do have something in your water, what kind of equipment you should use. So there are certifying bodies that test treatment equipment. They're the Water Quality Association's Gold Seal, NSF, oh boy, anyway, they're on this list here, National Sanitation Foundation, NSF, and Underwriters Lab, UL. So you should only use a treatment device that's got one of those three symbols on it, and the symbol means it's been certified to actually remove the contaminant that you're concerned with. And so there's a lot to that, and I'm going to show that here. So arsenic, you can see under where it says treatment options, NSF ANSI standard 53 is for absorptive media, and NSF ANSI standard 58 is for RO. And so you want a device that says it removes arsenic to the level in NSF ANSI standard 53. So it's been certified for arsenic removal. If you go look at treatment equipment online, like an RO unit, you're going to find them that range from $200 to $2,000 for under your sink. You should eliminate all those on the low end that don't say they're certified for NSF standard 58 for RO. And because you don't have complete confidence, or they may not work, they may not do what they're supposed to. And so that's, treatment industry is a big industry, and being informed and making sure you're making the right decisions, a lot of times you should rely on more than one person to help you make those decisions, just because you need to find someone who doesn't have a stake in the game, so to speak, to help you make those decisions. So again, as far as interpreting results, those are tools. That Be Well Informed Guide is a great tool. I use it, but it's for typical water. We found cases where there's certain constituents like silica in some water that changes the way arsenic can be removed, and it isn't as effective. I mean, there's all kinds of issues that can happen with water chemistry and groundwater. And so you should also, you should need to take it to someone to get a qualified answer. They're health professionals, I am not. And so the idea is to be sure your water is safe to drink for you and your family. And again, if you take a sample to someone, there's a few local health districts in the East, like in Connecticut and Massachusetts, where they've given themselves the authority to condemn your well, but 99.5% of the country, the health department's going to try to advise you not to drink water that's contaminated, but they can't condemn your well, they can't tell you can't drink it, all those things. And if you're concerned about that, then call your local health district and ask them what their rules are. Do they have the authority? If I give you a water sample results, do you have the authority then to force me to stop drinking my water? And if they say yes, then take it to somebody else. I mean, if you're concerned, and you need to still have somebody qualified review it, but it's your decision about what you do with your well. And I don't certainly recommend that. I know I mentioned the Muhammad Aquifer, and there's a county, Tazewell County, Illinois, where there's a lot of arsenic in it. And I can't tell you how many people said, I've been drinking this my whole life, I'm going to keep drinking it. And they may have 250 ppb of arsenic. And, the point I try to make is, maybe it's not going to harm you. You've been drinking it your whole life, but you may not even know it. But it may be next year you find out you've got cancer. But what about the other people in your life that are drinking that water? Do you really want to have that responsibility when you can do something about it? And so you should always try to make sure your water is safe to drink, not only for your sake, but for those around you and those you care about. So the other issue we have, and this is probably one of the biggest issues related to private wells, is poor well construction. Every state but two have well construction code, which means now to drill a well, you have to follow what the code says: type of material, depth, a minimum amount of casing, using a licensed driller. But every time, for every state that's created a well code, any wells that are already in place were grandfathered in. So we still see wells in pits, hand dug wells. You know, the well I grew up on was hand dug in 1933, obviously no log for it. But it wasn't safe. There's just a ton of these wells still in existence. I think RCAP Solutions is the Northeast RCAP, and one of their staff had a well that was constructed in the 1860s that's still being used today, which is the oldest one I've heard of, at least through the work that they've been doing, through those 2,800 assessments they've done. But there's a lot of problems with these old wells. One, they're not protective in general, and so there's a lot of opportunity for surface contamination. And in some cases, they can really be a safety hazard. You know, there's just an old piece of plywood over the top of it. Case in point, here's two pictures. The one on the left is from the Washington State Department of Ecology, which is the state agency in Washington State that regulates drillers and well construction. So this is an old well in a well house. You can see that there's half the plywood's gone. There was a hole over the cut in the plywood for that concrete block to sit over. You can see the pump sitting there. It's just an old corrugated pipe going down. This woman fell and it killed her. But you can see this building. There's a funnel laying there, probably to put oil in the pump. There's a broom there with, and you can see insulation that's rotting and laying on the ground there. All that can fall in their well. If it's not, you know, completely airtight in the winter, mice can get in there, fall in the well. We had someone a few months ago who told us that their dad's well had 50 snakes in it. I mean, all these things because it's not protective. And then, of course, the picture on the right, that's an old well that luckily isn't being used anymore. But it's down in southern Illinois, and you can see below that there's a 4-foot piece of concrete tile that's been put in at the top. So it sticks up about a foot above ground, had no cover on it. And a neighboring farm had a goat that got out and either smelled the water or something, but got in there, and that's how Don found him. Been there quite a while. And but we've seen lots of existing wells in use currently with things in them like this. So your well needs to be protected at the surface, and if it isn't properly constructed, you need to consider another well or a way to protect it properly from any kind of surface contamination, because these clearly are not. What should you do then? You should, if it's a well in a pit, you should extend the pipe up to the surface. And the one thing I didn't mention, you know, before the pitless adapter was invented in the 60s, many wells were dug in pits in northern climates where there's a frost line so that the pipes didn't freeze. Because if you had your well coming out of the ground in the winter, then those pipes would freeze. And so pitless adapter is a way to basically put a 90-degree elbow in your drop pipe to send it to your house below the frost line, and it still allows you then to pull up the pump and if you need to work on it and things like that. But if you had a well in a pit, you should bring that pipe up to the surface, fill the whole thing in clay grout. And if it's an old dug well like the two we just looked at, you know, consider a different type of cap, or these days a lot of those are being installed where you put a 6-inch pipe in down to 10 feet and then a concrete pad for the large part of the well, and then the top 10 feet is filled in just like a regular drilled well with clay and material that will protect it from infiltration. So the other part of this is abandoned wells. You know, many people who buy a property out in the country with an old farmhouse, or the well, it's just a barn that's left. They build a new house on it and they put in a new well, and they're like, oh, well, maybe we'll keep that old well for irrigating the garden. Or they don't even know there's an old well there. So those many of those wells, we don't even know they exist because most states developed well regulations through the 60s to 80s. And so any older wells, like the one I grew up on, are not on file. No one even knows they're there unless they're still in use. So they become a real safety hazard and a source of contamination. So if you know of a well or if you have one on your property, it's your responsibility to properly abandon it. And most states have a code to explain how to do that. And if not, someone falls in or contaminates an aquifer, and it's because of your abandoned well or unused well that you haven't sealed, you could be liable and responsible. And so here's just some examples. Again, the two pictures are both from the Washington State Department of Ecology from their blog. And in one case, they're pulling a horse out of this abandoned well that was just out in the middle of a pasture. And the one on the bottom, another person fell in an old well in his back property. It didn't know it was there. He walked away from this. He was very lucky. Fell 45 feet. They were able to pull him out, and he wasn't harmed. But I know there was just a story in the news not too long ago in Massachusetts of a person who fell through the floor of an addition to a house, and there was an old well underneath it, and that's what he fell into. And the well was from the 1800s, and whoever built the house, 70 years ago, just built right over the open well and never sealed it. So these newspaper clippings are all from Illinois except the third one. And those of you who are old enough to remember, Jessica McClure was a toddler who fell in a well in Texas. It took him a day and a half or so to get her out. And it was covered live on CNN. And so it was made national news. She's now grown, has kids of her own. But these other stories are all from local papers. And, before we had the internet and access to everybody else's information, the people in Springfield, the bottom one there, maybe didn't know about the girl who died in Buffalo Grove, which is a Chicago suburb, and they didn't know about the 4-year-old in Galesburg, which is in Western Illinois, because it only made the local paper. So this stuff happens a lot more than people realize. And, these wells are really a problem. And we believe that there's probably as many old abandoned wells in Illinois as there are wells in use. So that would be around 800,000. And they need to be sealed, and so that these things don't happen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the private well class, and then we'll go to your questions. And so again, the private well class itself, the 10-lesson class, is sent via email. So you go to our webpage, you sign up with your email address and your first name and what state you live in, and then once a week you'll get an email with a PDF attached that is the lesson for that week. And there's 10 of those. So we also do things like this webinar where we give people a chance to ask questions, and there's more information on our website, and I'm going to go through a little bit of that. So this is our front page. So you click on Take Our Free Class or Learn by Email, and it takes you to a page where you can sign up. I guess I got ahead of myself there. For the 10 lessons, they go through all kinds of, starts out with really basic stuff, the science of groundwater, and this is under the resources tab on the web page. There's one of these for each of the 10 lessons. The science of groundwater is lesson 1. Groundwater and well contamination is lesson 2. And these are resources we used and also resources that you can go to. If the lesson we provided, which, the whole thing, all 10 lessons together are 86 pages. So about 8.5 pages each on average. If that material didn't resonate with you, maybe one of these other documents will. And so they're publicly available, they're all free, and they go over groundwater basics or whatever, or information that might be specific to you. Like the first one under lesson 2 that's listed there is the Michigan Flowing Well Handbook. If you happen to have a flowing well, that's a much different animal than most of folks who don't and have a pump in their well, but there are certainly places where you put a well in, the pressure on the aquifer is such that water flows out the top of your well, and you don't need a pump. And so there's a lot of good information related to all those sorts of things. And again, there's one of these sets of information for each of the 10 lessons. We do webinars like today, and we record them. So last month, we did on July 20th, we did a webinar. We do it every year in July on septic systems 101. We bring in an expert who's from RCAP Solutions. He was a sanitarian in Massachusetts for 7 years. Inspecting septic systems, And Massachusetts also has some of the strictest rules related to septic systems in the country. And so Jim Starbird from RCAP Solutions participates in this every year with us and answers a lot of your questions because I can't. So we try to do that with a lot of the issues if we know there's people out there that will be better and more capable to answer your questions. For example, the last time we did this presentation was in 2018, but we also do specific webinars every once in a while. I think we've only done this one twice on issues that are important like lead. And so, the whole lead thing when it blew up with Flint, Michigan, that's a community water supply problem, but it's also a household problem because it's the lead in your premise plumbing or the lead solder in your copper plumbing that can also cause lead to leach into your drinking water at your kitchen tap. So it is an issue for private well owners. It's a matter of understanding your water quality. And so we brought in an expert from Virginia Tech, Dr. Kelsey Piper, to present some of the information on this webinar. And for this particular one, we also set up a bunch of resources. So if you go to privatewellclass.org/lead, it'll bring you to this page, and there's links to information about, especially down towards the bottom there, water filters for lead reduction. The EPA did some research after Flint happened, looking at different water filters that you can put on your kitchen tap to remove lead. And some of these point of use water treatment units actually are very good at removing lead, even at much higher levels than they're required to under the NSF ANSI standard. And so if you have those issues, there is some place to go. And you can also call us and we can help set you up with the right folks. We have a series of training videos that are on different topics like should I know about a shared well? That's one thing I was surprised about in working nationally on this program is how many people share a well with somebody else. If you don't have a contract in place or if it's not in the deed to your property and you're the person who has a shared well that doesn't have the well on your property, if they sell that home and a new landowner moves in, they may choose not to share the well anymore and you won't be able to do anything about it. Or if a pump fails and you have 3 people sharing a well, all of a sudden you've all got to come up with $1,000 or $1,500 to split the cost of that. There's things you need to have in place to understand to make sure that your neighbors and people who've been your friends for 20 years are still your friends after one of these incidents happens. And so there's a lot to know if you're on a shared well, and there's a lot more people on than I realized. And this just goes through some of the basics about what you need to keep in mind if you are in that situation. Other things like why does my well keep losing pressure, or how does my pressure tank work, is by far the most popular video we have. I just looked this morning, it's at 392,000 hits. And that tells us that a lot of people have pressure problems that are on private wells, which I know personally for a fact, and also that a lot of people don't understand how the pressure tanks work very well and how they can do something about that. And so these are all 4 to 6 minutes long. They're just about one specific thing, and they kind of walk you through some of the details just to give you that information. We have 6 podcasts. 3 of these are actually from a radio recording where we were interviewed by RFD Illinois, which is the Farm Bureau network here. The other 3 are the first 3 lessons of our class, and we haven't made any of the others yet. It's interesting how hard it is to make a podcast when you can't have figures to demonstrate the concepts you're trying to talk about. And so it's been intimidating, but we will get there someday. And we have another podcast program that we've started interviewing professionals, and that comes out next month. And so we'll have more to talk about that later on in the next few months. Our entire class is available in Spanish, including a number of the videos that we've done, and including the figures. So I thought I had that on there. I must have taken that out. So we are very fortunate being at a world-class university. We had a PhD student in civil engineering who was from Colombia in South America, and he was very passionate about trying to translate this information so that it was understandable and not using an automatic translator, which a lot of times messes things up. And so he worked for us for over 2 years. Him and actually his wife both worked to help translate a lot of materials for this program and a few others we have. And so it's a really great resource if you work with in an area with a lot of native Spanish speakers, email us. We can get you this information. And yeah, that's the URL below. So the goal of our program really is to give well owners direct information, why their well is important, why they need to understand how it works, so that they can really help protect themselves from risk, because you are on your own as a well owner. You're not on your own. You need to find, your local health district, your extension agent, or others at the state level, even your state geological survey. If those folks are more than willing to help, or your DNR, whatever your agency may be, but it's your responsibility. So it's something to take seriously, and being a good steward of your well puts you ahead of the game compared to a lot of folks who don't even maybe know where their septic tank even is, or some other part of their system, let alone how to take care of it. So I'm going to go to the questions that we've received. We did get a ton of questions. I'm going to answer about 15 of them. I'd say here, Katie can take your additional questions. I'm looking at my other screen, and it looks like we've got a number already, which is great. And we'll stay, let me just say that we'll stay and answer questions as long as you will be here. And also, if I can't answer a question, which is very likely, we would ask that you email us so that I can get an answer from someone who can answer your question and get back to you. But all of our past webinars also have questions, as I mentioned earlier, and so it's really worth your time to go back through our other videos that are recordings of our webinars and review those questions. As you'll see from the questions today, many of these are different. A few are the same, because we always have a number of people ask, like about shock chlorination, and so we provide that almost every time, just because it gets asked by a number of people, and so we try to be aware of that as well. So this is a long question, but it was really interesting, so we're going to go through it first. So what should I do to maintain a good working order of my well, which is about 40 years old? Is a home testing kit like an H2O OK Plus sufficient if done twice a year, or should I pay a lot more for a professional company to come and do annual testing? Should it be for fluoride? There's a lot of questions here. What should I do that's not included in home test kits? And I have a whole house filtration system, this Aquasana Rhino, which also includes a UV filter, and I'm diligently on schedule about replacing filters. So is it basically he's asking, if I do all of this, is it safe to drink? Okay, so first of all, there are several questions here. And on the maintenance side, you need to inspect your wellhead, ensure the cap is tight. If there's a screen on the vent cap, make sure that's there. There's soil mounted around the casing so that rain runs away from the well. There's not a gap between the well casing and the ground so that things can slide down or water can get down the side of the casing. And then you're looking for any cracks or that sort of thing. Other maintenance items would include filters from your treatment device, making sure you're always following recommended treatment best practices. So if you have a filter or some other kind of membrane or anything that needs to be replaced on a treatment device, if you don't replace that as it says to, it can become the contamination in your well. Some of those filters can form colonies of bacteria, some of those things. And then also testing annually for coliform and nitrates is important because that indicates a pathway into your wells, I already mentioned. So regarding testing, I've not seen the home kit you mentioned, but what we found is that most home kits that test for such a wide variety end up with a lot of false positives and a lot of false negatives, which a false positive means it says there's something there that isn't, and a false negative means it says there's nothing there when it really is. We don't rely on those or recommend that people do. There's some things like there's an industry, because of pools and things, like for pH and alkalinity, some of those tests might be fine, but I would not test for pesticides with a home test kit or a lot of other things because you end up with not really knowing what you have, or a false sense of security, or a false alarm. It's better to use a certified lab, and it is more expensive. But one thing I wanted to point out, as you mentioned, Aquasana Rhino includes a UV filter. A UV is not a filter. It's a UV light kills bacteria by running water through a clear glass vial basically that has the UV shooting through it, and you put a filter in front of it so that the water's clear enough that the UV light can hit all the bacteria. But UV units are separate. And I looked on Aquasana's website and looked at this unit, and I did not see any mention of a UV unit on this. It's actually a unit that uses some other process for softening water other than salt. I don't know if I agree with all the claims. It said that if you're on a low sodium diet, this is the way to go. As I mentioned earlier, you can also use potassium chloride on a normal or a regular softener to do the same thing. And so I would use a certified lab as the bottom line instead of using a home test kit for anything that you're really concerned about for your health. It's not worth something you buy in the store. You have to ask yourself, why is it so cheap and so much more affordable? You usually get what you pay for. And I have no stake in any lab game or any of those things either. So there's also a bunch of questions that are kind of common well issues, maintenance schedule. I know nothing about wells, but and as far as finding local information. So we can't answer all those on this webinar, but in our class, we certainly do. There's a whole lesson, for instance, on local information, on how to search for things in your local area. Lesson 7 is how to find local information. And it's just, it's completely free, it's self-paced. I mean, you get sent these 10 lessons over 10 weeks. It's up to you to read them. It's up to you to do any other work you want to do. It's all on you as the well owner. But in theory, if you've taken the step to join the class, to get the information, you're going to read it. And I'm sure there's some people who actually don't. But if you care about your well and your family's health, it's certainly worth your time. Yeah, so you can take our class just by signing up. I already went through this, but I added it again here by clicking on one of those 2 buttons. So what is the monthly maintenance of a normal functioning well? Well, there's really no monthly maintenance responsibilities per se. Your well should last, we see wells, I mentioned one from 1860. If you ask a driller, a well should last probably 40 to 50 years. Sometimes many of them last a lot longer. It just depends on the type of water you have, if it's corrosive, if it forms scale on your screen, what it's doing to your pipes, all those sorts of things. So as long as you're inspecting annually and testing, there's not a lot to do except pay attention when you're doing your necessary review of your wellhead and those things. Don't store things near your well. Don't cover your well. I just talked to someone last week who has their well is in their basement and it's a sand point. It's just not the safest thing, nor is it, if something were to happen to their well, they're going to have a hard time dealing with that and probably have to put it somewhere else. So that said, there's one other thing I'd recommend though on a monthly schedule is to pay yourself. So I mentioned I pay $40 to $50 a month for my water bill, and that gives me access to water that always is safe. There's always water pressure. I never have to worry about the water being off, or very rarely, unless there's some sort of issue with a pipe breaking in my community, where a section of town may then be asked to boil their water because of until they get that fixed. But if you pay yourself, eventually you're going to have some sort of problem. Your pump's going to fail, you're going to have valves that corrode, or the bladder in your pressure tank's going to fail. And if you have a fund where you've been paying yourself for your water over the last however many years, even $20 a month, like I said here, adds up. And so you have to replace your pump in 10 years and it's going to cost $4,000, you'll be prepared. Otherwise, that's a big replacement cost. And water, you don't realize how valuable water is to you and how important it is for flushing your toilets, taking a shower, everything else besides drinking until you don't have it. And you just talk to someone who's, in their 80s or older about when they used to have to go out and get a bucket and put it on a hand pump and pump water at, when it's 20 degrees outside so they could flush the toilet in their house. And that would be my mother. So, we don't know how lucky we have it, and it's worth making sure you're prepared when those things happen, because eventually it will. Something's going to happen over time. Everything has to be replaced. They're all mechanical devices, all that stuff. Should I put in a whole house treatment system? Should I put in, I think I spelled that wrong. Should I put in a whole house treatment system? Okay, yeah. There are very few cases where I'd recommend a whole house treatment system. It would have to be for a contaminant that is not only a risk to drinking, but also to your skin or breathing, like from showering or volatilizing in the air, because most things are a drinking issue. And the example, well, there's a couple things that are whole house filters where you'll think of it that way or not. Like if you have an iron filter coming into your house because there's so much iron in your water, I mean, you're replacing that filter, but you're removing the iron so it doesn't stain your sinks, and a softener is the same thing, so that all the water running through your house is soft and, the way you want your water to be, so to speak. But other things like an RO unit, I've heard a number of people who said, oh, I have a whole house RO unit. The ratio of water used to water wasted in an RO unit is 5 to 1, and arsenic specifically does not need to be a whole house issue. It doesn't hurt your skin at the levels found in groundwater. If arsenic were at 3,000 ppb or even over 1,000, which is very, very rare, but there are places like that, then you might want to ask a health professional. But we asked the Minnesota Department of Health about the highest we see in Illinois is around 250 to 300 parts per billion. And they said there's no risk from showering or bathing in water with arsenic at that level. It's just a risk if you drink it. So you should put in an under the sink RO unit and use it for your drinking water and cooking. And so as far as a whole house unit goes, if someone's recommending a whole house RO unit or any other kind of unit to you, find out why, because it's probably a waste of money, unless you have a really extenuating circumstance. And I'm sure there's examples that I'm not aware of where it is necessary. I just haven't come across them. But before you do that, consider that you're treating a lot of water that's going to be flushed down the toilet or go down the shower, that's not going to be used in any other capacity. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. So there's a lot of questions about shock chlorinating and bacteria and E. coli, and so I'm just going to run through this, and this is a slide I've used before, the next 2 or 3. How exactly do sealed wells get contaminated with bacteria? Well, it usually occurs when a well isn't properly constructed or the well is getting water from a very shallow source. So it may be that your well is only 30 or 40 feet deep, or it could be that it's a bedrock well that only has a small amount of casing. And the difference is a sand and gravel well only gets water through the screen at the bottom of the well. So the best example I can give you, and these aren't shallow, but if I had a 200-foot sand and gravel well, it would have 190 plus feet of casing that's solid pipe, and then 5 to 10 feet of screen on the bottom, which is where the water's coming in. So anything from the surface would have to go through 190 feet plus of geologic material to get to the well to be able to get in the well, versus a bedrock well where usually you only put casing 10 feet into bedrock. So in some places like in New York, in the upstate New York where bedrock's near the surface, I've seen logs for older wells up there where there's 12 feet of casing, even though the well's 200 feet deep. Because what a bedrock well does, you're not getting water from the bedrock, you're getting water from the fractures in the rock. And so you leave it open hole and you only case it down till it's solid in the rock so that you can take advantage of any fractures you hit, because that's where the water is going to come in to that hole that you've drilled. But what that also means is if you only have 12 feet of casing or 25 feet of casing, that means water can come into your well anywhere below 25 feet. So it doesn't matter if it's 600 feet deep. If there's only 25 feet of casing, you could have water from anywhere from 26 on down. And that is a risk because it's close to the surface. And so what I've put here, a shallow well, dug well, most dug wells are put in where there's no aquifer. So they're using the water table, and it's usually the shallow soil material. And typically those wells, like I said, the one I grew up on was 14 feet deep. They're typically less than 50. And a lot of times it's, you may have a thin sand layer, and I mean like inches thick of sand that's with all this other clay that's near the surface, and that thin sand is all that's providing water. And because water flows through sand so much faster. And so if that sand layer goes under your house over to where your septic field is, you could be drawing water directly from your septic field into your well. And that's one way that happens. Sand points are a well that are driven in with a sledgehammer typically. There's a 5-foot screen and then just pipe. There's no grout. It's where it's sandy soil at the surface, or the water, the sand goes down the aquifers at the surface, or the water level may be 5 to 10 feet. So there's no protection. Sandy soil, water flows through it readily. So every time it rains, anything on the surface is going to make its way down into the aquifer. And so they're just not safe. Some states have outlawed them, and some states still allow them because it's certainly cheaper, but it's also a lot more dangerous or risky health-wise. Or there's a source nearby, your septic, feedlot, surface water source, and your well's not properly distanced, or it's getting water from a shallow unit that is also draining one of those 3 things. Vulnerable geology, highly permeable soils, very sandy aquifers at the surface. I just mentioned that. We see a lot of sand points in Mason County, Illinois, because it's sand at the surface. The water level varies from part of the county, it's around 4 feet to as much as 40 feet deep. But in the area where the water table is really shallow, and it's still an aquifer in that case, we see a lot of sand points, because you can go buy those kits at Farm and Fleet or your farm home store, and you can put it in yourself. But then you're also drinking water that's very likely contaminated. Or karst geology, sinkholes, caves, large fissures in rock where water is already created, like Mammoth Cave. Or my experience was always in Southern Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. But it turns out there's karst geology in a lot of other places. You see a lot of springs in those areas, and they're all very risky. We have sinkholes in Southern Illinois where, one county that's mostly karst geology in Illinois, their health department, 80% of the private well samples they test are positive for coliform. And that's because there's just no way that aquifer is not safe to use by itself because of its access to the surface, so to speak. And every time it rains, material goes in. And the other is just the well's not properly sealed at the surface. I had someone, the tree root example I listed here, someone contacted me and said, I've got this well in my yard. We've sampled it. We've shot chlorinated it several times because it keeps having bacteria problems. There's no rhyme or reason why this should happen. The well looks fine. There's nothing on the surface I see. So I said, send me a picture. And they sent me a picture, and 18 inches from their well is a tree that's at least a foot diameter. So it's a PVC well. So what's happened is the roots from that tree have cracked the casing down below somewhere, 5 feet down, 10 feet down, I'm not sure. But, in that case, they need to get rid of the tree or move the well or get a different well because the tree roots, they're powerful. They're going to eventually crush the whole thing as it grows. And so those things are just a bad idea. You shouldn't have anything near your well. The Nebraska grout study, the state of Nebraska did a study looking at grout using clear plexiglass pipe, so they could evaluate how grout, which if you're not familiar, grout is the clay material or cement material you put around the well to fill in the space between the borehole you drilled and the casing of the well. And so it's meant to be impermeable so that things can't flow down along the well and contaminate the aquifer. Their grout study, which most states require grout in a specific formulation, showed that in some types of geology, the grout didn't stay in the borehole. It went out into the ground and left openings, and so it means it's not necessarily safe unless you really have a way to prove that or be sure. And then no sanitary well cap. We've showed some examples there, but a lot of things can get in wells if you don't have a proper cap on your well. And especially large diameter wells tend to be more at risk. We see a lot of those with a piece of plywood over them, or some tin, like tin from a roof, and concrete blocks or whatever, where snakes, a lot of things can get in underneath. So what do? You need to understand your well construction geology and your water source first. What type of well do you have? Is it properly constructed? What kind of geology do I have? Is there anything nearby? And your log, if you've got a well construction log, will tell you what your geology is. And then also, where's your water coming from? So how deep is it coming from? If you have a properly constructed well and it's a fairly deep well and the aquifer is protected with clay above it, and so it's a confined aquifer, you really should not have those problems unless there is something wrong with the well near the surface, for instance. So then what do? You disinfect your well if you have bacteria, and then retest after you've done that to make sure the bacteria are gone. And if so, then you just go back to testing annually. If not, sometimes it's worth chlorinating more than once, and we recommend that before you do anything more drastic. But some things to consider, chlorine is ineffective of a pH of 8. So if you have really alkaline water, like a lot of water in Illinois is over 7.5, our groundwater naturally, but above pH of 8, chlorine doesn't disinfect like it's supposed to. So you may have to use more. Or if it's high enough, it's just ineffective. You have to find another way. One thing I didn't mention here, well, so the other thing is, it could be a local source like livestock if it's near a feedlot or septic, or if it's karst. And if it's one of those things, it's likely going to come back. So even if you treat your well and you clean it, if the source is nearby and it's still there and it's still providing water, shallow water that's getting in your well, you're going to always have a bacteria problem. The only thing to do then is continuous disinfection. So whether it's chlorine or UV or hydrogen peroxide can also be used, and that's more of a new thing for me, but I see it's being used more and more. But you need a way. A lot of people don't want to have water that tastes like chlorine, but that's what communities do, right? They have it to show they have disinfectant in their distribution line all the way to the end. So some people's water has a little bit of a chlorine taste, which you do get used to. But the other way to do that is UV, and it's just it's a treatment device you have to maintain, and it costs money. So if it can be repaired, that's great. Bring it up to code. I know what I was going to mention. Sometimes whenever you chlorinate more than once, you could have like iron bacteria in your well, and they form in layers. So disinfecting once may kill the top layer, but not the next layer. And the problem with them is they can harbor other bacteria with them. And so it may take 2 or 3 times to do that if that's the cause. And it's hard to know. These aren't all simple, straightforward answers because there is no simple, straightforward solution. And worst case, you have to drill a new well into a different aquifer or go to a different location away from that source. If it turns out your well's shallow, especially if it's an old well and it's getting water from the water table near the surface, it could be that it's always going to be contaminated because it's just not a properly done well. So as far as well disinfection, there's hundreds of documents out there on how to disinfect a well and on websites. We looked at a lot of those and we chose the Minnesota Department of Health's Well and Water System Disinfection for Private Wells document as the best one to use because it's the most complete. It's not perfect. Just because things like the pH is over 8, it's not going to work regardless if you're using chlorine. But here's the question we were asked: is pouring bleach into my well on a regular basis an effective way to keep my well bacteria free? The other question we always get is, how often should I disinfect my well? Well, you should only disinfect your well whenever you've sampled and it shows there's bacteria in it. You don't pour chlorine. I had one well owner in Northern Illinois tell me that their contractor told them just to pour a cup of bleach down their well once a month and they'd be fine. That is the worst advice you could ever give. It doesn't chlorinate your well. It doesn't kill bacteria. And chlorine, straight 5% chlorine bleach is an oxidant, and it leaches metals from the brass fittings on your pump. If it's if you're in bedrock, any metals that are in the bedrock, it's just a bad idea. Chlorine can cause metals contamination. So it can leach out arsenic or anything else, and it's harmful to well components. So this guide is really helpful. It's on our website. When I mentioned before, lessons, each lesson has a series of documents that go along with it that are from other folks. On lesson 10 under water treatment solutions, this is you can click on it and get it there. But it walks you through, tells you how to mix it up. It goes through the whole process, even what to do with your treatment devices. Some should be taken offline. Some you need to take the filters out, what you need to do. And I recommend you use that. But again, you don't disinfect your well unless you've got a sample result that suggests you've got bacteria. Otherwise, you don't need to chlorinate your well. Even community water supplies for a long time didn't have to chlorinate if they were groundwater systems and could show they didn't have bacteria in them. Small ones like subdivisions or mobile home parks, a lot of them in some states weren't required to disinfect at all because it's considered not necessary. And that's the same for you if your well is, yeah. So what's the best way to remove rust iron from well water? Iron's not considered unhealthy, but it does cause iron staining. And so, we would recommend start with a sediment filter, a 5-micron filter. So that any oxidized iron that comes up, so it's already been oxidized, so what happens is iron is in solution, and when it hits air, it forms iron oxide, which is the red stuff we see in rust, right? And that's how iron, it rusts out your car, everything else, that's all iron oxide. Then if that works, if that doesn't really do the job, your softener will take some out, even though it's not necessarily meant for that, although you can get the kind that are meant for high iron. And but if you don't want soft water, then you can also get filters that are specifically for iron. They basically oxidize the iron before it hits the filter and then removes it. The example I used earlier with the 3 water samples in Mahomet, Illinois, he has a filter like this, and he has to change it every 2 months. And it's just black as can be. It's a white cloth filter, 5-micron filter, and after 2 months it's black. And it's more black than red because it also has manganese. And so it's removing both and oxidizing both. What are the common pollutants and how much do they vary by state? So as we, I think we've already covered this, but I included it. Contaminants can really vary a lot from area to area. It's, according to my boss and I, Dr. Walt Kelly, probably arsenic and nitrate are the 2 most common, but in some states, there may be other things that are much bigger issues, like arsenic and uranium in Massachusetts or beryllium in Rhode Island. Some are just very common to groundwater, like iron, but that's not it's a nuisance constituent, not a health risk. And I do want to mention manganese here. I mentioned just a second ago that removing manganese with iron occurs, they kind of oxidize and come out. EPA lists that as a nuisance constituent in groundwater like iron, but there's been a lot of work done in the last 5 to 10 years that show it causes neurological effects. And so it's being evaluated now in communities in the contaminant candidate list that EPA puts together every 2 years, I think, or every 4 years. So there are communities that are seeing, and what that is for is they're determining whether or not it should be regulated as a primary contaminant, a health effects contaminant. And some states have already passed laws. I know Massachusetts has a limit of 3 milligrams per liter. I just heard that yesterday. And other places, other states have already started regulating manganese as a health-based contaminant. So if you work with anyone who's gets a water analysis done, it's so common in groundwater, it's really a good idea to test for manganese. And then, and if there's very much of it there, then consider it a health risk and you need to treat for it. So, but what's in groundwater really varies by geology and land use, and on a local scale, your concerns may be very different as well. Does arsenic in well water affect vegetables and animals? So I put more into this than I probably needed to, but it really interests me. I did a lot of arsenic research 10 or 15 years ago, and so I'm certainly not an expert on the effects on vegetables and animals, but there's really a lot of information out there now. There was a study, and this was actually done in Pakistan. So there they have very high arsenic levels, between 238 and 2000 ppb, but they show levels in milk from goats, sheep, and cattle that were all above 10 parts per billion in the milk. So, and kids are drinking that there and all that stuff. So when you have really high concentrations of arsenic, if you're using it as a water supply or for irrigation, it can really be, it could be a risk. And some other research I found in the US said that the risk is mostly to the animal, and it might not produce as well in some of those things, but it's really not in the production value of the animal, although at really high levels we've seen here that it certainly can be in the milk. And then I found this from CDC's: homegrown fruits and vegetables are highly unlikely to contain arsenic levels that would affect your health. Vegetables grown in soils with arsenic will take up some small amounts of arsenic. Well, I don't know how old that is, but that's what I was on CDC's website. And so I also found an irrigation study done in the States where they use groundwater that had 100, 250, and 500 ppb of arsenic, respectively, and they use it on beans and lettuce. And the higher the level of in the water, the more they found in the bean and the leaves, and it was enough to be considered unhealthy. And so there have been several other studies done that way, looking at potatoes, wheat, carrots, other things. It's recommended you test your soil if you're going to grow vegetables. And if there's a lot of arsenic in the soil, which is, like I said, it's a very common element in soil, then it can really be an issue. And it turns out apples, pears, and grapes also absorb arsenic, and it ends up in the fruit. And the last thing I want to mention, and we're not here to talk about foods, but rice is considered the single worst food source for arsenic because it absorbs so much inorganic arsenic, which is the one that's risky for us than any other food crop. And USDA has this entire study on rice and the amount of arsenic in rice, and you shouldn't eat rice as your only starch, is all I would say based on what they said. But you can look that all up yourself or talk to a health professional to get better advice on food. But there is a lot of information out there on the web. And it certainly seems like, to answer the question from here, it certainly can, depending on the level of arsenic. And most of the arsenic we see in Illinois is below 250. And they saw like the 100 ppb didn't really have as much. It was still safe to use. And so, it depends on the water get your water tested. And it's funny, we're at the state fair this week, the Illinois State Fair, and I've had several people say, well, we have a well, but it's on our farm. We give it to our livestock, but we don't drink it. And they act like that's no big deal. But it is a big deal. And so you should know what you're giving your cows, their cattle, just because it can affect how well they do. And you could be harming your bottom line, if nothing else, as well as the cattle themselves, by not making sure your water's safe for them. I have concerns about herbicide spraying in field near well. Again, this is the way it was actually worded, so I just cut and pasted it. It's certainly possible that it could affect your well water quality, but it really depends. So it goes back to the same things. How deep's your well? How is your well constructed? And what's the near surface geology? Just like a feedlot or your septic tank or anything else, we see, Illinois is one of the largest agricultural states in the country. We have many, many wells that are in areas where near herbicide or pesticide use, and they don't show any occurrence because they're properly sealed. They're not getting water from the shallow water table. And, pesticides, especially today, have been formulated so they're not nearly as persistent in the environment and some of those things. But if you have an old dug well like the one I grew up on where the water was cloudy when it rained, I guarantee you that if there was anything applied that could get to our well, it would have been in it. And so it really matters about your well specifically, how safe it is to those things. But just being in an area where herbicides are applied does not mean your well's contaminated. So, and I'd be glad to talk about that further if you want to contact me. How would a power outage affect my water supply? We get this question actually fairly routinely. And so the bottom line is, most pumps are electric, so with no power, you won't be able to pump water. Some people have an old hand pump on an old well that's on their property if they're out on a farm. That's one option. I grew up in an area where it was very rural in Illinois. We were several miles from town. We had a generator we could pull out and connect to our power pole. And without it, we'd been without power on a number of occasions, including our well would not have worked, and our well would have, the pipes would have frozen. And I was 12 years old in 1976. We had an ice storm over Easter that left us without power for 7 days. And if it wouldn't have been for our generator, we'd have had, we wouldn't have been able to keep our freezer cold. We wouldn't have had a well. We wouldn't have had, a refrigerator, any of those things. And so if you live in a rural area, if you're new to living in a remote area, because it's pretty and pristine and all those things, you need to have a generator, not only for your well, but for anything else that you use electricity for, because it will bite you someday when there's a bad weather event, or even in some areas, forest fires may take out power over an area for a long time. So the assessment tool I mentioned earlier that RCAP does with well owners one-on-one, we put that question in there. Do you have a generator? Because a lot of people don't ever consider it, and it's especially in cold climates. Our well was only I mentioned it was an old dug well, but it was in a little building, a little concrete building. But if our power went out, we had heat tape in the winter around the pipes so that it wouldn't freeze that were electric. But we also kept the propane tank down in that little building, because if our power went out in the middle of the night in the winter, the first thing my dad did, or I did as I got older, was went down to the well house and turned on that propane tank to keep that little building warm so our pipes didn't freeze. Because when your well's that shallow, your pipes come out the top and then they go into the ground. So that building gets cold. And I lived in central Illinois. We had the coldest temperature I can remember is close to minus 20 degrees, and that's rare. But we every year we have a few days that are below zero, and that's going to be a problem if you don't have power and you don't have a way to keep, in our case, keep our pipes warm. But you're not going to have a pump to pump your well. Water from my tap is cloudy with bubbles when I fill a glass or container. The bubbles dissipate fairly quickly and the water clears up. I've heard bubbles like this can be an indication of well casing has a crack. Is this a likely source for the bubbles in our water, or are there other likely causes? Well, so from what I've ever seen, if you have a crack in a pipe and you're, because of the pressure, you're sucking air in as you go, you're going to see at your faucet, it's going to spurt air because it's already in the line. It's not going to be these little bubbles that you're talking about. What happens is it's much more common for those to be dissolved gases. So the pressure of the ground, just the weight of the earth on an aquifer, can keep gases in solution, because it's the I can't remember the equation, but it's PV equals nRT, right? We learned it in science class. Pressure volume is related to temperature, basically, and so the more pressure you have, it keeps that stuff in solution. So when you pull it up out of the ground, it goes to atmospheric pressure, and as it comes out, then the water, all that degasses and all the gas can come out because it's not under pressure anymore. And so typically whenever you see bubbles in a glass like that, it's because it's releasing gas that was held in solution because of pressure in the ground. The best example of that I have is we were trying to do a pump test on a well where we were pumping it at 1,000 gallons a minute, and there was so much methane naturally in the water that we couldn't keep a constant flow because it kept spurting and coming out of solution in the pipe when we brought it to the surface. And so it's just a phenomenon that's related to the weight of the ground and the weight of the water and where you're getting your water from. It's under much higher pressure than atmospheric, and when you bring it up, you're taking all that pressure off the system so all that gas can be released. So that's likely what the source is. And methane's a common example. Especially if you're in a glaciated area, when the glaciers, tore up the ground and buried all the trees and everything else, all that organic matter forms a lot of methane. And so like in central Illinois, especially, we see areas with the organic layers that where it used to be a land surface before a glacier filled it, now it's 80 feet below ground. And those areas have a lot of methane. And you see that in wells in our area. So finding well information. Someone asked about how do I find this information about my well, the depth and all those things. Your drill is really the best source of information about your well, and if you know who drilled the well, and a lot of times people don't, or it's older, and it's just the way it is. So if you don't, you may even be in a case, I've ran across a case where the driller refused to share a log, and the only thing I'll say about that is you paid for the well. Make sure that if you are going to drill a well, the contract you have with your driller includes that they give you a copy of the log they share with the state or the county, and what it includes, the geology and pump setting and water level and all those things, because it's ridiculous that you can't have a copy of the well you drilled on your property. But if you don't have that, then the next thing to do is to look to see who the agency is in your state that requires well logs to be filed, or in your county, and ask if they have that information. In some states like Illinois, you can look it up online. California, you can look it up online. And if there is a record, then you can find that. And what I'll say, it really varies by state and by agency. And if the well was drilled before those rules, so in Illinois, that law passed in 1968 to require permitting and a licensed driller and a well log be filed. In New York, it wasn't until 2000. And some states still have no requirement. Pennsylvania, Alaska, and Mississippi has a rule that if it's 5 inches or less, you don't have to file a log, or at least they did. And so a lot of wells in Mississippi are 5 inches. And so the drillers don't have to file anything. So they don't even know where all the wells are. And that's unfortunate. But even in Illinois, where we passed our law in 1968, we probably have records for maybe half the wells that are actually out there in use. And there's just that's just the way it is. And so if you can't find a log and your state or your local agency doesn't have a log, the next best thing would be to look in your area. Like in Illinois, our State Geological Survey maintains a map that you can go online. It's an Esri map. You can zoom into your area and you can see all the wells that are there that we have logs for. If you look at all these logs and all of them are 240 to 260 feet deep, all around you, then it's very likely that your well's nearly the same. Because sometimes you'll see an old dug well, or you'll see bedrock wells that are 500 feet, and then also some bored wells that are 50 foot deep. Then, unless you know it's a large diameter well, you're not going to be sure. But there's things like that you can do to try to narrow it down. And again, it depends on the state, what information might be available. But, California, 10 years ago, you couldn't get a log for a well in California unless you were the landowner from the county health department. And now all that's opened up, and all the logs are online and anybody can access it. And it's actually really nice. They've got a really great system. But those things are worth searching for, because it's really important to understand and know the depth, geology, well type, pump setting, all that stuff. So you understand where your water's coming from and what that means based on risk and all that stuff. Okay, it looks like what I did is I left that other question in when I didn't mean to. So this is the same question, but this is in bold is the question that was actually asked today. How do I find out the drilling, casing, pump depth details about my well, or if there was a permit issued? And I think I just went through all that, but yeah. So that was the question that was actually asked by someone on the webinar today. And I'm just going to summarize this. It was a really long question or information. What to do about old tile wells that are not in use, and shallow wells that can contaminate shallow aquifers. So in my experience, most private well issues that we ever see related to everything are because of one of these three reasons. Either the well owner doesn't understand how to be a good steward of their well and protect their source, so they have no idea how to take care of their well, or it's an old well that's not up to code, that so it's not protected from surface contamination, or it's an unused well that should be abandoned and isn't. And this question was related to old tile wells that are in a field where they're applying pesticides. And what do you do? Well, there is no simple solution, unfortunately. Really, you need to educate the well owners, bring the old wells up to code, and seal the unused wells. And that is just lip service in a lot of ways, because all these things take money and someone's time. We work on all these things when we can, as we can, really one well at a time. And that's the only way I think there is to approach it, especially this was at a county level. If you can find someone who will help donate funds, I know stormwater conservation districts in Illinois had a program where they would help abandon wells, or pay half the cost share for it. And so, you can also then, if you can find and get a group of people together who are interested in doing something about this locally, then maybe you get a bank to donate funds to help seal a well every year, and make a media event out of it. It's and also even the farmers. talk to the Farm Bureau and let them know this is an issue. And if you can show contamination, hopefully they'd be good stewards and be willing to abandon the well that's on their property. There just is no good solution other than these shallow aquifers and these old wells contaminate a lot of sources, and that's something we all need to work on. And I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you. How to get the other part of the same person asked about reliable, reasonably priced tests for a spectrum of pesticides that are applied regularly and migrate through these shallow wells and abandoned as well as in use get into the county water system. Well, so again, not a great answer. Testing costs, especially for pesticides, organics like VOCs, and emerging contaminants are really expensive. Some of these are new methods. There's things you can do, like there's assay techniques for determining presence or absence of a pesticide. If you can, we used to actually do these, and but you have to have a whole tray of like 40 at once, and it wasn't cost effective, and eventually our lab stopped doing it because they get a request, once a month to do one, and that just doesn't work. But if you can find a lab that does enough of that work, where they can give you an idea of, if you do the assay technique first with all the samples and you send in 40 samples and 10 of them have, say that they've got a detection of a pesticide, then you could take those 10 in to spend the extra money on an actual quantitative test, or suggest that they do that to the owner. But yet it's really a difficult thing. That's the bottom line. And one of the toughest things in our business is giving people all this information and saying, here's what you need to do, but then not having a solution for testing or treatment per se, because finding funding for that is nearly impossible. You can find funding to actually test for common constituents, but doing a more specialized type study where the costs for sampling are that much more makes it tough. And again, my suggestion is you need a local group willing to put in the time and the money to develop a program. And that's where we've seen success, is you have a few people who become the quote champions, start a group, get financing from some local civic groups or get them to volunteer to get the word out, and then using education and awareness along with that to make some changes locally. Because it's just, there's no, it costs what it costs. And that's the bottom line, is it's the time you have to put in and the amount of money it takes to do that kind of testing are prohibitive. And there just aren't programs available for that, especially nationally. So that's what I have today. I've talked a long time, I apologize, but we do have some other questions, and I will get to those here in a second. Let me pull this up. Wrong one. Okay, we're gonna do this full screen, and I have a. So these are the questions you all have asked today. So what's the best way to sanitize an above ground water tank that is spring fed? I don't have a lot of experience with that, but Pennsylvania has a private water supply handbook that has a lot of information about springs. I can find, I know I have a copy of that. I downloaded it 6 or 7 years ago. But that's what I would look for from Penn State Extension, because they talk about the different kinds of spring boxes that you can have and how to construct those properly, and what you need to do to disinfect those, because it's really, it's like a cistern in that respect. They are going to get bacteria and other things in them, and if it's a tank, if it's plastic, you could even end up with algae and some other things. So I would do that, and if you email me, I can get you to the guy at Penn State that might be able to help too and give you some advice, because that's just something I don't have experience with. I think we've answered how often you should test your well water. So when you test your water, do you need to report this information to the county or city? No, you do not need to report it to them. But you can go to your county or local health department or city or, local health district and ask them for advice on what the results mean. That's what I was trying to say. And again, if you're concerned, you can ask the county if they have any rules on, what their authority is over your well. A county, especially, nowhere do I know of in the country does a county have any authority to tell you can or can't drink your water. But you can ask just for peace of mind. But you should really rely on your local health district or county health department as someone you can rely on for good advice and information. And you should get to know who they are, because their number one priority is keeping their citizens safe, and that includes a lot of people on well water. We had I went and tested for a community that had high arsenic in Illinois. He found 7 or 8 well owners out in the country, all around the community, small community, who were going to let him test. They were getting a free water sample. We were trying to find if there was an area of the aquifer that was lower in arsenic. And so then what they had, which their city well had arsenic natural before treatment of about 45 ppb, and they were treating it to get it below 10, but it was always close. And so they were concerned, and they were hoping to find this alternate supply that would have lower arsenic. And so we sampled these 7 homes. All of them were higher than 45, and one of them was about 250. And these folks were 2 families had come together. The parents each had their own kids. There were 7 kids in total, and they're all drinking this water. And so, we gave them the information, suggested they talk to the county health department, especially for their kids. Want them to drink it his whole life, all that whole story. And, that's where we left that, because we're not a health agency, but we certainly impressed on them why it's not safe for their kids or any of them to drink that water. But they're a private well owner in Illinois. They're responsible for what they drink, and they need to take care of it. Our well log's available online. Can I look up my address and find it? It depends on the state. A number of states do have those things available. Most of the time it's not, like the one in Illinois is on their State Geological Survey's website. It's not searchable by address. You pull up a map and you zoom in, and you can find it if it's there that way. And what I will tell you is not all of those wells find their way on the map. And sometimes we have old records, at least in Illinois, where we may not be confident of the exact location, so it doesn't make it on the map. But if you call us and we can look in the files, we may be able to find, especially if you know the original landowner and homeowner who built the home. A lot of times we can find a well log, and it really helps us too, because now we have a location. We know it's in this certain 10-acre plot or within a section, but we don't know the exact location because of the way the log was filled out, and it's an older well. But then we can update that and put the new owner on it and put it in our files, and it will show up. It's all public information. So they stopped using lead piping in 1986, but they still use lead solder. And the definition of lead-free changed in 2014, so that it was up to 5% was still okay before that. And so you have a lot of fittings, especially that have more lead, and enough lead that there was a study out of Virginia Tech where they actually sampled a bunch of wells, and some of these homes had copper pipes with lead solder. Some had just some of these lead fittings that were only 5% lead. And they still saw, because the water's corrosive there, the pH of some of the groundwater there is in the 5.5 range. They still saw a lot of lead being leached from that. And so really, unless your home's built past 2014, and if it's using lead or copper or galvanized, you should probably test it. But again, it depends on, you just need to test your water to see if it's actually corrosive or not, or aggressive is the term they use today, because not only pH, but alkalinity and chloride levels, and there's something else. My boss is the lead expert in our group, that can cause that to still leach lead or copper. So, and what's the best type of piping in terms of least contaminants? You know, that's a personal choice. I know, you know, their copper does have a health limit, and so it really, I would look at, you know, getting a water sample collected and find out what your water chemistry is. And it may very well be, like many wells across the country, that your water's not aggressive at all. So, you know, there's whole programs out there on stopping scale formation in pipes, and that's when the water's on the other side of the neutral boundary, if you will. So it can be corrosive, where it eats away at the pipe or leaches metals, or it can be scale forming, which eventually, you know, it builds up scale on the inside of a pipe. If it's on the other side of the, you know, if it's alkaline and some of those things, and you're trying to stay right in the middle where it does nothing. And so there's whole programs on that as well. And so it really depends on your water chemistry. You know, I know the person who had the well that we use their water analysis for this example, they have PVC piping in their home. But again, there's pros and cons of every type of pipe, and you need to talk to someone who's an expert at that to determine what might be best for you. But you know, today everything's lead free, and so you're not going to have a risk of that. But if you use copper piping and it's very corrosive, you're still going to have copper concerns. That's the best I could say there. I live in the Colorado mountains. Should I test my well for radon? You know, I don't know. I don't know enough about Colorado and radon. I would imagine, you know, yeah. I'll have to talk to somebody and get back to you, is the bottom line. Yeah, I know radon testing is a unique thing because it's a special test only because you can't let any air out, so to speak. It volatilizes so easily. But we have folks that I can ask. I just need to have you email me so I can look into that more. Yeah. When purchasing a house with a well, besides getting a water quality test, what else should we do or look for? I'd ask for the log. I'd ask, you know, all the information about the well, when it was drilled, who the driller is, if they have any treatment equipment, is it maintained, why are they treating? I'd look at the well. I'd have a well inspection done. That would include a sample result. To have a qualified, you know, driller or well contractor take a look at it and see if they have any issues or know of anything. And I'd also contact your county health department in that area or local health department and ask them if there are any natural occurring contaminants that you need to be concerned about. Because it's, you know, it's very likely that folks have no idea that have been living in a house with a well and been drinking the water that, you know, that aquifer is high in arsenic or, you know, something else, because it's just not something people think about. So I would do all of those things. We have a local county ordinance that denies homeowners to construct a new well if there is a public water system available for them to connect to. Is this common practice? Yeah, I'd say it is becoming more common practice. Now, and not at the county level per se, that's interesting, but, and if you're in a county that has rural water districts, then I get where that's coming from, but certainly communities have always had ordinances that don't allow you to have a private well in a community with a water system. And that's also from the standpoint of protecting their water source. Every hole you pop in the ground, if someone's not diligent and doesn't take care of it, could be a source of contamination. And in all honesty, one of the questions we ask people on our well assessment is, how close are you to a public water system? Because many people aren't prepared to take care of their wells and do all the things they need to do to make sure their water's safe. And a lot of folks I run across who have well problems, it's because they didn't take care of their well, and they would be much better off on a community water supply. And for all the marketing that goes on about bottled water and everything else, and your public water supply is your safest bet for safe drinking water. And that's just a fact. So, so I do think it's common practice. I know when rural water districts go through areas like, I mentioned Pike County, Illinois, 80% of the samples are high and have bacteria. They put in a rural water district, and many of the homes, even out in the country, are now on water systems, and they make you plug your well if you have one. And it used to be that a lot of these rural water districts would allow you to keep it for using in your garden or for livestock, whatever, but so many people cheated, if you will, and connected it to their home so that they could save on their water bill. That's introducing, that's against the law, for one, and it's also putting everybody that's on that line at risk of you having well water that's not safe and not treated, getting into that treated water system and causing problems. So, yeah, I would say it's common practice, certainly at the city level. So, are well depth and casing depth the same thing? No. Especially in a sand and gravel well, they should be, because a sand and gravel well is constructed using a pipe, either steel pipe or PVC, solid pipe, except for the bottom 5 to 10 feet, or a community well, it could be more, or it could be a 4-foot screen with a well screen at the bottom, and that's in sand and gravel. But most bedrock wells, again, you're getting water from the cracks in the rock, not the rock itself, like you are in a sand and gravel aquifer. So you can't have casing in the way, or water can't get in. And so you usually drill 10 to 20 feet into the bedrock, and you seat the casing there, and the rest of the hole is open, so that every fracture you hit provides water to the well. And I mentioned New York earlier. Now there's a law there that says you have to have at least 50 feet of casing. So even if you hit bedrock at 3 feet, you have to have 50 feet of casing. And that law is there so that you can't have water come in your well at 3 feet, because that's likely going to be surface water. And so by going down to 50 feet, it's supposed to provide some sort of protection. But those wells could be 200 or 300 feet deep. And that's just typical. Now, sometimes, depending on the type of rock, if it's friable or if it's sandstone, you may have casing all the way down, and they just cut slots in the casing near the bottom. But typically a bedrock well is only cased 10 to 20 feet into bedrock, and the rest of the well is open hole. So one of our other webinars, I show a log from Illinois that it shows, I think the well's 240 some feet deep, and they hit bedrock at, I want to say, around 100. And so there's like 120 feet of pipe, and then the rest of it's all open hole, and the well's 240 or something like that. So yeah. Are septic tanks regulated by the state of Illinois? I can smell sewage coming from his property, and my new well tested positive for bacteria. Do I have any recourse? You should go to your county health department. That's the first place to go. We're not regulatory. The State Water Survey is a research and outreach agency. And I know some of the rules changed. Some septic systems now are regulated federally, and there's more rules at the federal level that have trickled down to the states. But if you have a problem, your county health department are the folks, and environmental health people are the ones who inspect those when they're put in and do all that stuff. And so, but if you can smell sewage, then, and there's people living on the other property, then it's certainly a problem. And just because you can smell sewage, depending on the specifics of the situation, it doesn't mean that's why you have bacteria. But you should go to your county health department in Illinois. What are the best resources to educate people in the process of buying a home with a well who don't have time to do the 10 classes? I would say, if you look online, the Water Systems Council has a brochure for new home buyers. We also have a webinar that we do for realtors, which I think we're going to do in the next month or two, but there's several of those that are already online. So if you look through our webinars and our videos, we do a realtor webinar, and it's really set up to be, it's for realtors, but it says if you're the buyer, this is what we suggest. If you're the seller, this is what we suggest. and I would go through that webinar. Yeah, and the Water Systems Council is the other place to go. And I think it's just watersystemscouncil.org, but they have a brochure that's pretty nice on for home buyers. But definitely do the video. I think, yeah, because we're trying to educate realtors on why they shouldn't rush people to buy or sell, and why they should have their wells tested before they ever put it on the market, because it's, you know, it's what you should do so that it's on the up and up, so to speak. Can washing rice a couple of times reduce arsenic in rice? You know, I have no idea, but I don't think so. I think it's actually in the grains of the rice. It's not something like a, you know, a film that's on the top. But you need to ask a food person, like your county health department food people, about that, or your health district food people that inspect restaurants and all that stuff. They would have a better idea of how concerning arsenic in rice should be to you. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around. Yeah, if you have any questions, let us know. And everyone have a great day. Thanks, Katie, for all your help.
Thank you.